Hi, Hilary. Thank you so much for joining me on this podcast interview today. Oh, you've actually frozen.
I think, okay, can you hear me now? Because
Okay, now
there's been a bit of a freeze on both ends.
Yeah. Okay, now I can hear you. Is it good? Shall we start again, maybe?
Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah, that's it. So, hi, Hilary. Thank you so much for joining me today on this interview.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. So I came across your profile because you are very well known for having started MinorMynas, which is a SaaS company, since you were 10 years old, and it's been such an incredible journey. So I thought, obviously there's so many people who are going, who's this person who's so young and had this amazing, amazing idea and is just growing to such an extent to so many different countries. And I thought to start that we would go all the way back to 2016 when you were 10 years old. And I understand that your mother actually sent you to summer camp with your brother to learn Chinese. And that was something that really kicks off the whole journey. And I wonder, what was this language? What were the languages that you were speaking at home? Was Chinese a prominent thing? What was the situation like?
So for us, the reason why we went to Taiwan was more of an issue with Mandarin than Chinese as a whole. Because we all speak Cantonese when we're home. When I speak to my relatives, it's usually in Cantonese. But because my brother and I went to a international school, we didn't have the same exposure to, let's say, reading, writing, and even just speaking in Mandarin with others. Given that the Chinese-speaking community isn't just Cantonese, it is important for us to know a bit more. So that's partially why we went to Taiwan, to get the immersive experience and to just use the language rather than have it set in a situation where it's just dictation and just negative associations.
And was it a huge shock for you to have to use Mandarin all the time?
It was more like a game because I remember when we were in the airport, my mom told us that this month we'll be going for 28 days, and your challenge is to speak as little English as possible. Because I'd recently read a different book called Dumpling Days by Grace Lin at the time, I was fascinated with this idea because the main character also went to Taiwan for exactly 28 days.
So what was the situation like? Was it as exciting as you thought it would be, or was it a lot harder than you thought it would be?
It was honestly a lot of fun. I made a lot of good friends, and just being in a different community, being in a different place for a month does kind of expose you to different cultures, because even if it is somewhere where you speak a similar language, the customs on the ground, the food is different, and it's just something entirely different to be there.
Yeah. And so you had that entire experience. You came back a couple months later, you learned about this competition, which is the AIA Emerging Entrepreneur Challenge in Hong Kong. So I understand that intrigued you and you wanted to join. So why was that? Were you always interested in starting a business?
Honestly, not really. Before then, I just thought entrepreneur was a weird word to spell.
Yeah.
But I did decide for some reason to just look through it, because when you send me a link, I will read any word that comes up on the screen.
Mm-hmm.
And through that website, I came a concept that businesses can make a positive impact kind of stuck in my mind a bit, because even because I like debating, I do read a lot of news, and what you usually see is the evil corporates, big tech being the horrible monsters of like boogeymen. But the idea that startups and businesses could make a positive impact for good kind of stuck with me, and I was thinking about how I could take part and learn more.
Yeah, and I understand that you took part and you grabbed a couple of your friends to join with you. So how did you convince them to join you? Were they also intrigued by the idea?
It was more like going up onto the playground, going, the three of us don't really like, we didn't really like playing tag or playing football. We were the group that hung out in the library. I was like, here's a competition, it sounds like fun. And we spent 2 weeks thinking of the most stupid ideas. Honestly, like a pen with a little maze in it, which honestly was just ripping off Smiggle, or just trying to find different iterations of, let's sell cupcakes for charity. And the day of the submission, the two of them dropped out.
Yeah, and you had like 3 hours to prepare something, right? What was it like? Did you not feel like you just wanted to quit?
Just more like, I want to do this.
Yeah,
There was no good idea back then.
yeah.
Now I have 3 hours to think of something. It was less pressure because it was more like an optional thing, but I found that the pressure did help in giving you a sense of urgency rather than just letting it sit there and not really engaging or grappling with the idea more.
Yeah. So after those 3 hours, what was your idea? What do you present to them?
The first slide, for the submission, you had to have 3 slides. 3 PowerPoint slides where you had your idea clearly elaborated. So I crammed a ton of information onto the 3 slides, going, first of all, language learning sucks. The way you solve that is to get kids to talk to each other, therefore exchanging their mother language and having the added advantage of making friends, therefore combining fun with learning. Of course, I didn't put it as eloquently, and during the first pitching day where you had to try and get in, I entirely forgot one of the cue cards that I had in my mini pitch.
Oh no. And what was it like? Was it okay though? Like no one noticed?
Hey, I got in.
Yeah, you got it. And you got to the final where I think Elon Musk was also presenting. What was that whole experience like?
That was very, very exciting. I personally didn't have a clue I barely knew who Elon Musk was when they first started mentioning him, because what 10-year-old goes in depth about Tesla?
Yeah. Yeah.
But my mom told me a bit about him. I decided to conduct some research, and I got really excited because it was at the central government quarters. It was central government building. You know, I was able to take a look at where the government usually holds their press conferences. And it was just more like this surreal moment where it's, here's a massive group of people, 1,000 people in the audience, and I am going to speak in front of them. So that was crazy. I wound up practicing my pitch for weeks, and to this day, I can still recite bits of it off the top of my head.
Oh, wow. So what are the little bits? Could you recite a little for us?
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I have a few questions. First of all, how many of you have children? Can I please have a show of hands?
That's brilliant.
And yeah.
Yeah. So you basically ensured that you got the crowd engaged as one actually did something rather than just listening.
The key part about memorizing that pitch was that my slides entirely crashed on the day.
Oh, no.
So that caused a moment of panic, really, because you had your slides crashing and
I think
the
I
thing
remember
behind
you were doing the
gone.
clicker, right? And they was like, oh, it's not working. It's not working. I saw that. But you were not flustered. That's what amazed me. You just carried on and said, all right, we'll just go on. So were you not scared at all inside?
Honestly, I was like, oh, that's not good, is it?
Yeah, yeah. But that's brilliant. So after that, you end up winning the first prize and the business prize awards. And what was that like?
Honestly, it was more like it was a bit of relief because I was reciting those 2 pitches for weeks and weeks. And it was more of a question of getting out of the way and trying to do as good of a job rather than the idea of winning or not.
Yeah. And I understand that a lot of people approach you after that, and your mentor approached you as well. Was it overwhelming to have all these strangers, these grown-ups suddenly approach you and be like, this was an amazing pitch. I want to talk to you more.
Yeah, it was different because I was a kid who while I liked to speak about my opinions, I wasn't necessarily super outgoing. I was more like the kid who sits in the library. So that was a bit of an eye-opener, the idea that my idea actually is of some interest to the adults. Yeah. I actually had a few people approach me that day, and I wound up having some meetings in the months after. My mentor obviously helped me a lot, and he's honestly the main reason why I decided to keep going. But my first ever business meeting outside of the competition, I still remember the place. It was this place in Tin Hau, where it took a long time to get to the place. We got lost. And it was in that place where I was told to just draw what I wanted to do, ideally on the website, and had some feedback from a different developer. So that was also pretty cool.
That's amazing. And what was the conversation like with your mentor? I think he took you through the whole process of a company to IPO, right? What do you remember of it?
So I remember he sat me down and pretty much started with a very interesting opening, telling me that failure is inevitable and it will come.
Whoa.
As a 10-year-old kid, I was just like, that's an interesting way to start. But then he kind of elaborated more, going, going on to explain that in every process of every journey, there'll inevitably be failure. There is no avoiding it, but it is something that ought to be embraced. While the implications of that didn't really sink in during that first meeting, it is those words that kind of ring true after the longer you wind up doing your business. So that was the starter. We then went on to talk about what exactly are startups and what do they honestly do. While I had a vague idea from the competition, he went into a lot more depth with this, explaining how to iterate, how to get to beta testing, what's an MVP, and pretty much going so all the different stages of funding and all the different types of investors. The idea was to kind of lay out the whole roadmap for me so I understood what I could do next, and to understand that it's a lot more than just a little kiddie project, which inspired me a lot, and this made me decide, let's do the first step of getting some users to just test it out.
Yeah. And so was that where you transitioned to having conversations with your family about taking it forward? What was the conversation like with your family?
Honestly, I was just talking to my parents and going, it wasn't necessarily this life-changing moment where you talk to your parents and you come out at the end of it going, we're starting a business. It was more like, let's just do a bit more. Let's get some users. If anything, it'll be a fun experience, just like going through the competition.
Yeah.
And it was just more like these gradual tiny steps that just kind of snowballed into what MinorMynas is today.
And so where were your first customers coming from?
So we went on Facebook. I pretty much wrote up, here's my concept. I want to go further. If you parents are interested in sending your kids to do some trials with me, please send me your details. Then my brother and I ran a few tests where we got kids to teach each other. Myself and my brother also taking part as users to see what it would be like to get kids to teach each other their own languages through a Zoom call or Skype at a time. During that trial, we saw really mixed results. We had a baby, a literal baby, yes, with her mom saying, pretty much using her as some sort of puppet. She says hi.
Oh, wow.
To kids who were incredibly shy, or on the other hand, kids who were incredibly outgoing and didn't want to stop talking. So mixed results.
Yeah.
From that, we got a few key takeaways. First of all, video calls aren't necessarily the best way to get kids to teach each other. Why was that the case? Well, kids found it really difficult to break the ice, especially for shyer children or for younger kids who might be freaked out by being forced to talk to someone for the very first time. So that was the key takeaway. The other takeaway we had was, if MinorMynas was to be a global business, there was no way we could do it through video calls, because fundamentally you'll have a problem with time zones, and children are not going to be up at awkward hours. In fact, now it's about like 8 p.m. Hong Kong time. Yeah. That's bedtime for 6-year-olds. So from that, we continued to iterate and eventually came up with the idea for our MVP.
And so what was your MVP at the time?
So our MVP at the time had 2 key components. First of all, on the kids' end, we had the videos. So for a while, we dabbled in YouTube videos to try and make the content more engaging. The idea being that you would engage with the content, then go to speak about it in the second part, which would be groups. We pretty much created group chats where children could create them in different languages and create their own topics, thereby giving a language aspect to it and to ground it to the real world through something you're interested in. The results we got from the MVP was inspiring to me, because we saw that kids went so far beyond just languages. My initial expectation was pretty much how to talk about flowers in, let's say, Japanese, and having the conversation centered around and the purpose being to learn that language. But the results we got was pretty much kids teaching the stuff they were passionate about, language being less at the forefront, but yet still a crucial part. So I know this sounds ambiguous, so what does that critically look like? For example, before we shut down our MVP, we saw a few kids talking about the pandemic in its earliest stages. We had 7-year-olds from Hong Kong and Malaysia talking to another kid in the States, explaining what their parents were doing to keep them safe, the science behind washing their hands, and just why you ought to wear a mask. I found that really inspiring because these kids were just 7 years old. I had to just check again in their profile to see it, and I was honestly amazed. This wasn't just the pandemic group. We also saw kids talking about climate change. We saw kids talking about art, talking about, briefly, philosophy. So that group was quite short-lived, to be honest. Or even one kid who was teaching over 15 languages.
Yeah. And I mean, like, I understand that when you first started, there were only 4 of you that grew to all these people. So what was it like? I mean, those initial days before growing up to all these different groups of people.
Those initial days were interesting, to say the least.
Yeah.
We had myself, my little brother, a kid in Taiwan, and a kid in America. And it was just the 4 of us for a good while. And it was honestly a bit of a confusing time for me because it was a question of what are we going to do to grow the business? I tried many different things. It was at that time where I did most of my pitching. I went to Rise, which is the biggest startup conference in Asia. I pitched at so many different places, went to networking events, and yet we were still persistently stuck with 4 users.
And who were the 4 users, though? It was you and
myself, Alexis, my little brother, a kid in Taiwan who was 7, who was just browsing the App Store and came across MinorMynas, and a kid in the US who had a very similar story. I was bored, browsed the App Store, and found you lot.
Yeah. Sorry, go on. And then after that, so what did you do that changed everything?
So it was honestly just pitching a lot, going to as many events in Hong Kong as possible, speaking to people, and just building these connections. We wound up having the BBC contact us out of the blue. We don't know who told to them about us or how they got word of it, but clearly those pitching had some impact. And it was really after the BBC interview where things started to take off for us. It was in that year where I had reporters coming in every other week.
Oh, wow.
Which was a very exciting time for MinorMynas. And that's how we managed to grow really quickly in the span of a few months that year.
I think it was like the 9th month and you were already having like 4,000 downloads from 20 different countries, wasn't it?
Yeah, by the time we closed the MVP to transfer data over to our next version, we had users from over 60 countries.
It's amazing. And like, where were you thinking that it was going to go at the time? Or were you just trying to scramble to get on with it because you didn't expect such a load of people to come?
Honestly, I wanted to just keep it there for a while because when there's a big influx of users, that's when you can really see what's going to happen due to a wider variety. So we spent about 7 to 8 months just observing our users, trying to engage them on the app and see where it led us. And that's how we decided during that period to just take as many notes as possible on what we do for the next version and see if MinorMynas had moved beyond languages, what exactly we were going to do with the business.
Yeah. And what were the most significant findings that you had at the time?
I guess a few of the most significant findings would be, first of all, kids love to teach. Second of all, peer-to-peer learning environments are incredibly important. And finally, the idea that parents ought to be included in this community. So for the first version, we pretty much had parents having the role of just monitoring their children. We had parent and children accounts. Kids' accounts were linked to the parents to ensure safety and to make sure we didn't have kids' data, to make sure that we were as safe as possible. So parents just supervised and made sure that the kid was okay. With version 2, we're going to open up parent communities where we'll be able to have 2 concurrent databases of parent groups where they get to talk about parenting or issues that they find important, whereas kids also have their own communities. Because of these 2 important databases, we would A, make sure that there's a dedicated space, and B, ensure that kids have their own true social community for ourselves. And these 2 databases interact with each other to keep them safe and to make sure parents have an international board where they can talk to, rather than just localized mums groups.
And I think you have a very interesting approach to privacy as well, because you think that kids should have privacy, but at the same time, they shouldn't be interacting with people, for instance, that shouldn't be there on that platform. So how do you introduce that?
So I believe that for us kids, we need to be able to have access to the internet, but that doesn't mean that we put ourselves into a dangerous situation. Why do I put it this way? Today, we live in a world where we kids have very limited options when we go online. Either we have video games, which honestly waste time, either YouTube, which is also can be valuable, but more often than not is just more passive activity. Or we have educational products where it's the same stuff as school repackaged with shiny colors. They all have their own flaws. The idea of being too passive and the idea that it's just the same thing that you learn in the classroom. The final option that you have is to go on social media, which if you're like over 13 can be dangerous enough, or if you're underage, even more so. So MinorMynas' approach was to create a situation where it's fun, safe, productive, combining the best aspects of these free situations for kids. I think that we kids need to be able to socialize with one another online, because that's honestly revolutionized how adults interact with each other, and that we kids are either put into dangerous situations or left out entirely. MinorMynas wants to change that and make it fun and safe.
So how do you make it fun for the kids on this, and how is it different from other kid apps out there?
So first of all, what we do is give kids autonomy. It is proven by many different education journals that we kids learn best when we're given autonomy to learn as we wish and given the freedom to do so. Because just let me pose this question. If you have children, what do they learn quickly? Is it the school stuff where it's just homework that you have to be forced, or the things they're truly passionate about? Whether it's about books, dinosaurs, ships, we all have our interests and we will read completely crazily into it because we love it. MinorMynas wants to replicate that excitement by giving them the autonomy to learn. That means they can create their own groups on things that they love, or join these groups with other kids to talk about topics that they all enjoy. So that's how we keep it fun. The other way we keep it educational is to let kids teach the skill sets that they like. So when you're teaching something that you already know, this A, consolidates your own knowledge, and B, pushes you to kind of recategorize it and make it easier to package. So even if you have that information, you might not be able to get it out in a polished manner. Whereas if you're able to teach it to other kids, you're able to categorize that knowledge in your own mind, which will be more useful for you to use in the future. So that's how we keep it safe and productive and fun.
Yeah. And then what is the typical way that kids are learning on the platform?
The typical way they learn is just to speak to each other. So on MinorMynas, we have a few ways that kids communicate. First of all, we have images. So if you were to teach someone how to draw, you could take a photo of your own creations. We also have a little drawing function where you can sketch. So that's useful for things like Chinese, because you can show the brush strokes. Or we can use audio. So if you want to teach someone music, for example, when you play the piano, you'll have a recording. Plus we have text, which is useful for most things.
Yeah. And like, I understand that you also learn Chinese on the platform. So, I mean, honestly, the first question would be like, how helpful is it? Has it actually seen kids grow and really like deepen their understanding of the language?
So I'd say that MinorMynas is most useful as a supplement to your learning. I would not go out and say that MinorMynas is the place to go if you were to learn an entirely new language, because obviously there are some limitations. I'd say that MinorMynas is the best place to practice what you know, because when you learn things in a classroom, whether it's just a list of words or a few sentences, the way that it's best internalized in your brain is to use it in different situations. It is usually a repetition of like 10 to 15 different scenarios where something is said when it is really lodged into your brain. MinorMynas is the best place to do so because you can have natural conversations with native speakers and other people who are trying to learn. It is in that situation where you're able to make those key neural links, and it is there where you're able to just have fun with the knowledge rather than have it be so far removed from the real world.
Yeah. And what are parents' role in this? Do they get to observe these discussions as well?
For all public groups, which is like where you have more than two people, parents can see the full content of the group. So this means that they know what group you're in, and if they have concerns, they can read the content. For private chats, which are one-on-one, the parents can't see the content because, we still need a bit of privacy, but they can see who the kid is talking to, the age of the kid, and just have a bit of peace of mind to know how often they're talking to them. So if they have suspicions, they can step in.
Yeah. And I understand that the second version is also being launched as well. So what's happening with that? What's new things that you're introducing?
So our second version is now under development. We're getting very, very tantalizingly close to finishing up. So we're now polishing up the UX UI. We're getting ready for a group of private betas to come on and give it a go. So we're due to launch soon-ish, provided that the pandemic doesn't mess up the development schedule.
Yeah. And how is the second version different from what you already have?
So a few key differences would be the introduction of parent communities. So parents will be able to talk to each other and they can just form accounts, which makes their side a bit more interesting than just a supervisory role. For the kids end, we have introduced new functions. We have group categories where you're able to better sort things out. And we've also introduced a lot more new functionality and entirely refreshed design. Furthermore, we've migrated our app from just iOS to a web app because it is the fastest way to be accessible to all devices. So this means that you can access it from your phone, your iPad, your Android computer, or any device that you have, which will make MinorMynas a truly global product rather than just be stuck in the Apple world.
Yeah. And wouldn't there be a lot of finances involved in just growing this? So how are you financing this whole thing?
So I've personally been funding MinorMynas through my speaking fees. So a year or so ago, I suddenly had a speaking agent reach out to me and say,
London
would you
Speaker
like to
Bureau.
schedule a meeting? Yeah. And I was honestly I was taken by surprise that someone would pay to hear me speak.
Yeah.
But
and how has
that's
been
been
so
pretty
far?
helpful.
Yeah.
So I've had quite a few gigs now. Like right before the pandemic hit, I was in Dubai at the Global Women's event where the Dubai government was hosting it, and there were people from all over the world. And I was even able to watch Theresa May speak, which was incredibly exciting.
Yeah. And what was the most memorable thing that happened to you at that event?
I'd say it would be the dinner before the event because I was able to interact with all the other speakers, and it was just an inspiring community to talk to because you would see people like female leaders in the tech industry and across the world just coming together to discuss how women can work together and how we're able to be trailblazers.
Yeah. And I understand, so going back to the idea of finances, that you were also raising funds online as well, asking
Mm-hmm.
people to pitch in. How has that process been, and why were you doing that?
So the idea behind the crowdfunding was, first of all, to get a bit of community support, and second of all, to test out marketing tactics, because crowdfunding in many ways is like launching a new app. You have a clear message that you want to market, and there are very similar avenues that you would use compared to a real product. So that was more like a trial launch before it actually did, if you will.
Yeah.
So we learned a few key messages from that, which is exactly how you should do a social media post. Since then, we've been modifying the way we interact with social media. In the past, it might just be updates about what we were up to or like what speaking events I was at. But from then on, we've changed our tactics somewhat to share articles that we found important to the community, discuss issues, and to kind of have a more engaged response rather than a one-way, here's my product.
Yeah. And what has been the most important social media platform for you so far?
So far, it's really been Facebook because while MinorMynas is a kids product, we found that one of the most effective ways is marketing to parents. Mainly because kids, especially young kids, are not that active on social media. And it is through parents where you're able to directly get to the consumer who will ultimately be the one paying.
Yeah. And I also noticed on your YouTube channel that you do more than just talk about MinorMynas. You talk about your vlogging, you talk about your thoughts on politics as well, and other books that you're reading. So what is the idea behind that? Is it to show them more of your personality?
So I guess the YouTube aspect of MinorMynas in the past was to kind of bring a bit more to the table, because especially when we were having few users, we found that YouTube was a good way to reach more people, because rather than downloading an app, you can just browse and you'll wind up being able to watch it. And YouTube is a community where kids are at. If it's just watching nursery rhymes or cartoons, most children are on there, and we wanted to be able to reach more children rather than just parents through Facebook.
Yeah, and we've talked about community quite a bit, and I wonder, could you share with us what the Hong Kong entrepreneur community is like?
The Hong Kong startup community is honestly incredibly
Oh, you've actually broken.
supportive.
Oh, do you mind? Do you
Can you
mind
hear me now?
repeating? Yeah, you broke up. Can you repeat that?
Okay, my apologies. I found that the Hong Kong startup community is one of the most supportive networks you'll find out there. I honestly think that if I were in a different place, a different country, a different city, I probably wouldn't have been able to start MinorMynas. Why is that the case? Well, in Hong Kong, our startup community is very well connected and still fairly small. Hong Kong only has about 7 million people. You're bound to bump into each other at some point. This means that everyone has an incentive to work with each other, and everyone is so incredibly supportive of you. Like, they took a 10-year-old kid seriously. That is really saying something about these people. And it was due to them helping me out, giving me tips along the way, that made me think that this is something that I can do, and something that I really ought to do, because MinorMynas can make a difference and is going to be a very good product for kids.
Yeah, and what was the biggest takeaway from all of your conversations with the startup community members?
I think don't be afraid to talk to others, because I've bumped into many people, and even if the first initial conversation wasn't necessarily productive for either side, it is that initial connection that allows for more collaboration down the road, or even just a heads up of what to do and what not to do if you're going to do a similar idea. For example, at one point, MinorMynas was thinking of shifting our product to be like 5 to 10 seconds, very short videos to teach a concept. Like, here is a pair of glasses, and gang. It was through someone else's tip-off where we discovered that Musical.ly, the predecessor to the TikTok, actually started with that idea of creating very short educational videos, but that didn't work because people found it boring. If it wasn't for that tip-off, my brother and I would have probably spent months taking these short videos that would have been boring and just unwatchable to anyone else.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And you mentioned your brother because your brother is your employee. Is that right? So what is it like working with your brother?
Alexis is honestly great.
Yeah.
I remember when a few years ago when I'd go to different meetings, and if he'd come, he'd always introduce himself as, "Hi, I'm Alexis Yip, and I'm the CPO of MinorMynas." When you'd ask him what the CPO is, he'd say this Chief Prank Officer.
Oh, I mean, you've got so many ranks now, so that is completely valid as a designation. That's brilliant.
Honestly, breaking the tension is something he does excellently.
Amazing. And do you ever find people treating you as a child, or would you rather they treat you as an adult?
People treat me as a kid sometimes. I get that. I'm 15.
Yeah.
But I prefer being treated as an adult because I've had some experiences. I'm still learning, but that doesn't mean you should count me out as immature.
Yeah. Do you have any misconception you like to clear about child entrepreneurs?
I'd say that honestly, there's not that many of us. So I just say, just talk to us as human beings, and
Yeah.
we will just show you what we've got. And if you don't believe us, we'll either prove you right or wrong.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people listening to this would think, okay, you are doing all these amazing things, but how are you balancing with schoolwork? So what does your schedule normally look like? Does it feel overwhelming sometimes?
Honestly, not really. The most overwhelming thing for me is sometimes Latin homework. So my day usually starts at 6 a.m. I'll take the dog out for a bit because it's early in the morning. My dog hates tiny dogs, so it's a good time to take him down. Then by the time I get up, I'll still have about an hour or two before school where I can work on homework and just sort out the studying for the time being.
Yeah.
My school has a pretty good policy on homework, so there's very rarely that much to do outside of school hours. So it is after 4 p.m. where I'll be working on MinorMynas, having meetings, having podcast interviews, for example, or just doing what needs to be sorted out. And I personally deal with my tasks on a piece of paper in my room. I'll just have everything written down of what needs to be completed. Emails to reply to, a book to read, articles to look through, and just deal with it in order of priority. As long as you're doing something, you're not going to fall that far behind.
Yeah. And do you get to meet up with your peers, like, because I understand you're homeschooling. So what is that like?
My two best friends are also homeschoolers, and we WhatsApp a lot. One of my friends is in Australia, so we tend to FaceTime her from time to time. And we just chat with each other like any other teenager would. Especially given the pandemic, we probably engage in the same way everyone else does, whether it's just WhatsApping, video calling, using Discord, for example. There are always ways to connect with each other, and it's just taking initiative.
Yeah. Is there anything you miss from just going to a school?
Honestly, not really. Well, other than the library, of course. Homeschooling has been a lot better for me in general.
Yeah, amazing. And you mentioned COVID. So how has that impacted you and MinorMynas?
So honestly, my life hasn't changed that much. When I was doing homeschooling, with online, when I started homeschooling, I spent a year doing a self-study thing where I'd submit assignments to teachers online. And my life isn't different from that in any tangible way. It is still sitting at home doing my assignments and being here. So personally, it hasn't affected me too much. In terms of MinorMynas, we had a few. Honestly, our tech development has been severely delayed by the pandemic due to just how badly it's impacted everyone. And on the other hand, the pandemic can be a good opportunity for MinorMynas because of how everyone is recognizing that the education system as it is today needs to shift. We can see how inflexible it is and how online education is potentially the only avenue we have for the future. This means that MinorMynas can occupy a unique role because we want to offer something entirely different where kids have a peer-to-peer environment which is productive and fun. This means that we're able to launch in a situation where everyone's looking for these options. And I believe that MinorMynas can be a good way to fill that gap between fun and, just school.
And I'm just wondering, is there anyone else who's offering products similar to MinorMynas?
Honestly, not really. The closest you've got is people trying to exchange languages by talking to each other. And that's just for adults. For kids, there really is no truly social place where we can engage with each other without it being limited to people you already know. Or it's lacking the education aspect entirely. We're able to uniquely mesh these different aspects together to create the product MinorMynas is.
Yeah, and what is very unique about MinorMynas is that it was by a kid for kids. And obviously, you're growing. And how do you see the future of MinorMynas with you? Like when you're older, like can I understand where the child is coming from?
Yeah, I get that. I mean, I'm 15. I'm turning 16 in February. I'm just getting older. But I'd say that MinorMynas is something that I continue to be passionate about because I honestly think it has the potential to make a true tangible change. The only question is how far I will be able to take it. I want to do as much of MinorMynas as possible, but I also recognize that there might come a day where I personally might not be the best person to take it forward, whether it's because of, I don't know, work commitments. We're talking like 10 years in the future or something. Or if I just simply don't have the business acumen to take a big company forward. I recognize that and I want to take MinorMynas as far as I can. But if there comes a point where I need to take a step back and just let someone else take the driver's seat, I will do that for the sake of MinorMynas.
That's amazing. And one of the things you've also alluded to slightly is that you read a lot. You love reading and just expanding your knowledge. So, I mean, like, what this is probably a question you face all the time. What are your favorite things to read and learn from?
I like this question because usually people ask me, what's your favorite book? Which is impossible to answer.
Yeah.
I personally love reading history books. And in my room right now, I have 2 shelves. I've been divvying it up into categories, and I've completely blown past my history shelf, and I'm stowing my history books in these little nooks and crannies everywhere.
Yeah.
I just finished reading A History of Terrorism, which is quite interesting because it is a social phenomenon that has existed for virtually as long as human beings have. And it is interesting for me to see what leads people to extremist views and what leads you to act upon them. And I think that history, if I were to use an often quoted bit from Mark Twain, history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. Probably paraphrasing there. I definitely agree with that because human nature fundamentally has not changed. And understanding behavioral patterns in the past helps us map out what will come. And that's why I love reading history so much.
That's amazing. And I understand one of your idols is Gary Vee. So how did you come to discover him? What is it that draws you to him?
Well, I came across Gary Vee a few years ago when my mom was listening to his podcast. And being, I think, 11 at the time, I came to the conclusion that if I am working on MinorMynas, I ought to know as much as startups as I can. So I wound up reading his books. I wound up listening to podcasts from him. And I just liked his attitude, his no-nonsense attitude, that if you're going to do it, just cut out all the fluffy stuff and, just get down to the business.
Yeah.
That's a attitude I really respect.
That's amazing. So if you were to meet someone for the first time and you had like 20 seconds to introduce yourself, how would you do it?
Do you want me to introduce myself in 20 seconds then?
Do you want to do that?
If you want.
Yeah.
Okay. Hi, I'm Hilary Yip. I'm 15 years old and I'm the founder of MinorMynas, which is a startup that wants to create an immersive, fun, and productive online product for kids worldwide.
Amazing. And tell us one thing that people probably don't know since there's so much that's written about you.
Just how quiet I am. Because outside of MinorMynas, I'm just the type who curls up in my room and reads with a cat on my lap.
Brilliant. So I normally end off my interviews with these questions. So firstly, do you feel that you have found your why at the age of 15?
I don't think anyone can say that they found their reason for existence, because as you grow, as you enter different stages of life, you will come to new conclusions. But for now, I found it.
Brilliant. And do you think about and what kind of legacy do you want to leave behind?
I just want to be a force of good change and to make sure that I'm able to truly solve the problems that can be solved.
Yeah. And what do you think are the most important qualities a successful person should have?
Definitely curiosity. It requires you to look at the world critically to come up with the problems that need to be solved. And it takes the creativity to take your probing and be able to come up with tangible ways to make it better.
Yeah. And where can people go to connect with you and find out more about what you're doing?
My personal Instagram handle is Hilary Yip, and you can find MinorMynas on pretty much any social media platform.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Hilary, for this amazing interview.
Thank you so much. It's been great to talk to you.